Hi, in this video we're going to build a REST API using the Spring Boot framework. So this is a course on Java using the Spring Boot framework to create websites. So if you want to become a software developer, make sure that you come back. Here is the index of the current course that you're looking at. We're working on Spring Boot, which is to help you build websites using the Java language. So we're in part 3, which is about making a REST API right now. So let's talk for a few minutes about what a REST API looks like before we try to explain why we make them. So here's an example of a service that is available as a REST API. It's called metaweather.com. If I look down the page, I can see some examples of how to use it. So let's try this one here where it says London. What happens when I click London? I get some data back that looks like a JSON object. You can see the format. Let's go back to the page and see how we would use that. So if I wanted to use the London weather report, I would click here, and you can see that we have JSON formatted data that tells us what's going on. What a surprise. It's heavy rain in London. And you can also see that there's data for sunrise and sunset and many other things here. So that's the point of this API. So when you're building a website, you have the option of publishing in several data formats. You probably are familiar with HTML, which is a web page. So your web server is usually tasked with creating a HTML page that the browser shows. Well, with a REST API, you can see that we're producing a different type of text. It's JSON data. And this is obviously not meant to be shown in a web browser yet. So there's an intermediate step that has to go on, and usually it's digested with a program on the client written in JavaScript. So those libraries that work with that JSON data are things like React and Angular and Vue, so popular names that you've probably heard about. It's a whole nother study, and so there's extra work to be done by the programmer to create that. So then you might ask, what's the point? Why create another app? It's essentially what you're doing is doubling the work. Why do that? Well, it's because you can have a JSON data feed that goes into multiple types of apps. So just because you have a web page front end doesn't mean that that's what all your front ends should be. So think of an iOS or an Android app. They also can consume a JSON feed and then produce a front end. And so it's not just web pages that we're dealing with. So if you do a back end with JSON data, you can have a clear distinction between the front and the back. So you're going to have maybe a team or a developer dedicated to creating the back end, and then another developer or a different team that is responsible for the front end. And with any luck, they'll work together well and be good friends. The reality is that the front end people get all the glory because that's who you get to see their work on. And in the back end, we keep those things kind of hidden because who knows how that JSON data actually gets generated. So the goal for me is to show you how Spring Boot is going to use some of these annotations and convert a regular controller into a REST controller. So we're going to be looking at the top left corner here of some of these annotations, and also down in the bottom right where we have things with request body and request attributes and other items that we're going to look at. So you're going to see some code here in just a minute. So here's an example of what a controller will look like. So do you see any differences? Well, we have a new URL, a different front end link, obviously. But what about the controller itself? Notice on the top, we have a REST controller instead of controller. So this clues in the framework that says, hey, we're going to be producing JSON data likely. And you can see that in the method itself, we are telling it this produces JSON data. So obviously. Now then there's another item. Look at the return. So instead of returning a link to a page such as orders.html, the return type is the data itself. And so Spring Boot is going to format the JSON data, send it to the client in the format that we looked at just a second ago. Now our design for our application is going to look like this. We're going to leave the front end to someone else. So whether that front end is a React developer, Swift, or Android, or whoever, we're going to let them take care of it. Our goal is to provide whatever comes below that. So we're going to create a controller and some services and some SQL statements, whatever it takes to get our request met. So we're going to go through all the layers of our n layer design, and then when we go back up through the top, our response will be just in the JSON format, so that way the front end team can take over from where we leave off. Now in a future tutorial, I'll give you a simple front end single page application that we can demonstrate written in JavaScript, and so you can get the whole picture. But that front end is really quite extensive, and it requires maybe another whole semester or another course for you to figure out how to program that. So let's take a look at where we're going with this project here. When we're finished, we're going to have a REST service that will do 5 different operations. You can see I have the program called Postman installed, and we'll get to that, but we'll show you how it works first. So let's choose this item called getAll. You can see that the localhost API v1 orders is the URL. When I send this, I'm going to get a list of results below that shows everything in my database, all the way down to the end. I'm also going to create a search API, and so when I search here, I'm going to put in a word like the word jump, and when I send it, and then you can see that I have wingsuit jumping lessons down at the bottom. If I wanted to search for something else like the word moon, I would get the orbit the moon activity. And so the search function is going to return a partial list of items. Notice that the item is actually a list. It's a bracket here, and then we have the curly brackets to start the object. Now let's go to the next one. It says post one. So I'm going to post a new activity, and you're seeing here that I'm putting it in the body in the JSON format, and I'm going to add jump rope as my new activity. So I'll choose send, and I get a response back that says 1, which means a success. Now if I were to go back and choose the search and put in the word jump there, I'm not only going to get the jump lessons from Norway, I'm going to have also jump rope now in my database. So I just posted a new one. Let's go to the next, which we're going to create is called update, and you can see that I'm going to update item 19, and I'm going to say jump rope really fast. When I push send, I will get a response that says this is the updated one, and so now if I search for my new activities, I should see the description has now been updated. Lastly, there's delete, so I'm going to put in a number here such as 19 in the order number that I want to get rid of, and I push send, and when it comes back as a true result, that means that order has been deleted. So now if I go back to the search results and choose send, I will no longer have jump rope, I only have the jumping lessons. And so when we're finished, this whole API should be working, and I'll take you through all the steps of installing the software and programming the controller and making all of the methods work properly. So it's a pretty extensive project, but when you're done, you'll have a pretty proud thing to look at, and you'll have a feeling of an accomplishment as a web developer. So let's get started on the code. So I'm going to return here to our code editor. We're in Eclipse. I finished up with topic 3.2 in the last lesson. So now we're going to copy this and extend it. So I'm going to copy and paste the project, and I'm going to name the new project as topic 3-3. Go ahead and choose OK. Now the first thing we have to do is a few minor changes so that topic 3.2 becomes 3.3. Let's go find the class, which is called our topic 3.2 application. We're going to refactor that and name it as topic 3.3. Then look in the POM file, and inside the POM file you'll find 2 references to topic 3-2. Name them both as 3-3. Save the changes, and we're ready to continue with modifying our project. Now the first thing I'm going to do is look for the controllers folder. I'm opening up the orders controller to see what I had created earlier. So I have an order business service that is giving some orders to a method called show all orders. That's all we have. We're going to copy this and make it into a REST controller. So I'm going to copy this class. So let's go to the left column here and choose copy and paste. And instead of orders controller 2, let's call this thing the orders REST controller. How about? So this will handle a different kind of request from the client. Okay, so I'm going to close this item here and make sure I open up the right one. So orders rest controller, I double click it and I have myself some code to edit. So the first thing I'm going to do is tell Spring Boot that this is a special kind of controller. So instead of @controller, I change the annotation to say @rest-controller. So it will be expecting to produce some kind of a text result rather than a web page with a time leaf page. And then also I'm going to change the URL. So the request mapping is going to be at some specified URL that is different than the one that I had before. So this one will come in, I'm going to use the function at API and then v1 as a version number and then the orders as the final trailing. So you could call this thing any string that you like, but this is a common convention to use API/version number and then whatever product you're on. Now the version number is important because in the future, if you change your API, you can change it to version 2 or something a little bit bigger. And so you can keep the old version running for some time while you're trying to transition your clients into a new API. So let's tackle the easiest one first. Let's go down into the method called show all orders. We're going to keep this as a get mapping because we're just requesting data. And we're going to erase the model because we're not going to try to insert anything into a time leaf template. And so that model is how you pass data into a HTML page. Instead, we're just going to produce a list. So we've got an item here called orders and it's getting it from the service. Next, we're going to just return the list itself. So the return statement says return orders. Now there's an error, and the reason why the error is there is because the return type of this function was a string. So let's change it to what a list of orders is. So what is a list of orders? You type it as list, bracket, order model. And now we've got ourselves a whole service that should serve JSON data. Let's save this and try to run it. Okay, I run the app and it looks to me like there are no errors. Let's swipe over to our browser. So I got the browser open and I'm going to my local host. So I look for 8080 as my item. So then I'm going to put in /API v1 and then the word orders. And what do we get? We get a JSON formatted list of all of the items that are in here. So the current app that I have is producing junk food. So I have Big Mac as my first item. We're going to add more features to this in just a moment. But you can see that this feature is working. Now let's go back into our code and take a look at a promise that we made in a previous video. So if I go into the business services area, I'm going to see an interface that we programmed. And the items in the list were unfinished. So we just accomplished doing get orders through our REST API. However, there's a lot of other things that are ahead of us. So we have no idea on how to search our list. We don't have to add, we can't delete, we can't update, and we can't get a single item. So there's a lot of programming to do here. So we're going to create a data service and then we're going to implement all of these methods in it. Okay, so we're going to build this from the bottom up. Let's go and make a new package in our project. So I'm going to right click up on the title of our Java packages and make a new package. So right click new, choose package. I'm going to name my package as com.shadsluter.data. So the first thing I'm going to do is define what my data access can do. So let's right click and choose add a new interface. So the service will be called orders data access interface. Now remember, the interface is just the plan, so we need to specify in here what the data can do. So remember that the interface is really our plan, it's our blueprint. So let's define all of the methods that we can do in a CRUD app. So let's say the first thing that I can think of is I want to get a single item from my data service. So the item that we're talking about is an order model. So we'll say get by ID, and the user has to provide an ID number, which is, in this case, is a long. Sometimes int is common, but here we're using long for the data type. Now we want to be able to get all of the orders, so we'll have to return a list. So a list of type order model is our data type. A good name for this is get orders, or you might call it get all orders. We don't have to have any parameters, so we're just going to fetch everything. The next method is going to be for searching. So searching will return a list of items. So it's the same return type, list of type order model. The good name for this is search orders, and we do need to provide a parameter, something that is being searched for. So in this case, it's probably the name of the description. So we need a string, and you can call it something like search term. Now I'm going to ask the API to add a new item to my list. So let's put in an item called add1, and we'll provide a new order as its parameter. Now the return type, I'm going to count it as a long. So eventually I want to be able to return the new ID number that comes back from the database. Now we're not using a database yet, but we'll eventually plan for that. So the return type is long, which will be interpreted as the new item's ID number. Now we want to delete one, so we'll create an item called delete1. And the item has to have an ID number so we know which item in our list we're trying to get rid of. Now the success or failure will be returned as a Boolean. So if it was successfully deleted from the database, we'll return a true. If it was failure, we'll turn a false. Now the last item we're going to create is one for updating. So this is editing. We'll call the method update1. And the return type is going to be the updated version of the model. So if we update one, let's return what the newest edition of that model is. Now we're going to take two parameters. I'm going to ask for an ID number for which item you're intending to update, and then I'm going to ask for an entire model to say, hey, here's the new version of this ID, and so we'll have two parameters in this one for the update, and it will return a single model as the updated version. Okay, remember this is just the plan. Now let's go ahead and create the order service so that way we can manage the list. Okay, so now we have to implement this interface. So let's create a new class inside of this same package. We'll call this thing the fake or orders fake DAO. So once again, we're going to use just this list of memory items. The list has no database connections yet. And we're going to call it a DAO because that stands for the data access object. So it's one class that can handle all of the database activities. Now we're going to implement the orders data access interface. And so as soon as we tell it that we're implementing this interface, we have to implement the methods, otherwise the error will be left there with an underline. So when we implement them, we can see all of the different methods that were defined in the interface. They all appear here, although in an unimplemented state. They're not working yet. Now the next step is to take all of the information that is currently stored in our business service and move it down to this level. We've moved down to the data access level. So we're going to cut and paste a few things to make this thing work. Now this fake DAO is going to serve the exact same purpose as our current business service. So I'm going into the order business service class, and what I'm looking for is the list. The list that we created is called orders. So I'm going to copy that line and move it back into this new data access DAO and just paste it as a class member variable. And so now we have ourselves the first stage of our data access service. We're going to need a constructor, so let's go ahead and right click and choose source, then generate a constructor. And actually I don't ask for any parameters at all, so we'll just deselect the properties called orders and we'll click generate. So you should see now we have a list of orders, and then we have a constructor that I just added. Now I'm going to steal some more code. So let's go back into the order business service, and we have this list of all of these adventure packages. I'm literally going to cut them out of here because they don't belong in the business service layer. They belong down here in the data access layer. So I'm cutting them out, and I'm putting them into the constructor now. So the fake orders DAO constructor is going to generate a bunch of new items. And so cutting and pasting moves those over here. Lastly, I'm going to go back into the business service layer and delete this item that was defining the new list. Okay, so now you can see that we've got all these orders that are added in the constructor. So the only thing we have to do now is for the get orders command is to return something. So I'm going to remove the comments and remove the null, and I'm just going to say return me the entire list of orders. So this will just send everybody back with no search results or any qualifications. So I've destroyed the business service project here. It doesn't seem to work anymore because orders is unknown. What we have to do now is do some dependency injection to insert the one class into another. So here's how this inserting by dependency injection is going to work. I'm going to go back into the orders fake DAO. And the first thing I'm going to do is identify this thing as a repository. So a repository is the name of a specific kind of managed bean. And so a repository is useful for when you are doing data access. So this is the idea of a DAO in itself. So that's why I use the name. Now, if I want to inject this into the next layer up, into the business layer, I can use an auto wired now because repository is identifying this as a Spring Bean. Let's go back to the next level up, which is the business service. And so to fix this error, I want to have something from the data access layer. So let's go to the very top here, and I'm going to put in a reference to this new class. So let's identify this new property with the interface name. So that was the order data access interface. And we can call this thing our orders DAO as the incidence. So now if I want to make this inserted, I have to use auto wired. So after doing auto wired, this is going to create a new instance of this item called orders DAO. So this is dependency injection in action. Again, if you want to see this in more detail, watch the previous video where all of this was explained more slowly. Now, we're still not quite there. The orders DAO has the ability to get data and return it as a list of orders. So down here in the get orders, we can delete this and change it now to orders DAO. And let's see if we put a dot, do we get anything? We have get orders as my method. And get orders return type matches exactly here with the list of order models. So I'm going to save that. So I've been working on this orders business service, but the target is actually set to the order business service 2 here. So I'm going to go up to the application config, so Spring config, and say I'm no longer interested in order business service 2. I've been working on 1 all the time. So I'm going to save that. As a matter of fact, I don't think I'm even going to use this in the future. So I'm going to delete the business service 2 right now, and it will just be less confusing to have that around. So once I deleted this orders data service 2, I get some errors that show up down here. So if you look in the orders rest controller in the top, there is something that was imported here. And obviously we don't need that anymore, so I'm going to save. And then the orders controller, I think, had the same problem. And so sure enough, there's a reference to a class that no longer exists. So it looks to me like there's still one more up here in this Spring config area. There's an error in one of the imports. So it does reference this business service 2, which I'm no longer interested in. So I'm just deleting that one. Okay, so we've got this whole list being returned. Let's see if the browser can see it. So I'm back into my web browser, and you can see when I push refresh that now I'm getting the skydiving experience instead of the other ones. So it appears that the data service is passing up to the business layer, and then the business layer goes to the controller. Now what is left to do here? So we have the get orders, but all of these other items are still undeveloped. And so we're going to spend the rest of the video working the details out here. However, if you are smart and you want to try it on your own, then go ahead and create these items and then come back to check to see if you did them right. Otherwise, we're going to start coding right away. All right, so let's start working on this problem here with the search orders method. So in this method, we're supposed to be able to find all the items that match a certain search phrase. So we're going to go loop through the list. So the loop I'm going to use is a for loop. And I'll show you another solution in just a moment that's more elegant, but for loops make the most sense to me. So for, we're going to go from 0, of course, to the length of the list. Then inside of this item, inside of this for loop, we're going to be doing a comparison and adding anything that matches to another list. So we better define that list. I'm going to create a list and call it found items, and we'll start off with an empty list. Now inside of the for loop again, we're going to do the if statement to compare, to say if the current item, which is I, get at position I, if the product name matches the search phrase. So I'm going to put lowercase as my conversion, so that way I'm going to do a case insensitive search. So I'm going to do dot to lowercase. Then I'm going to ask if this search if this product name contains the search term. If it does, then we'll add this item to the found items. So we're making a found items collection and we're adding some of the items to it, only the ones that contain the search term. Now there's one more change I'm going to make, and the search term. So I want to do case insensitive, so I'm going to choose 2 lowercase as well for our search term. So we're going to compare lowercase to lowercase. This makes it a case insensitive search. Now this is layer 0, or the low layer. Now let's go back up to the business layer and see if we can utilize this search orders method in the second, or the middle layer, we'll call it. So now let's go take a peek at the order business service. As we look inside of it, we notice that there is nothing in here about searching. So we haven't told the business layer that it has to even be concerned about searching. We've only done that at the bottom layer. So we're going to have to update the interface now of any business service class. So let's go take a look at the interface, which is the item right below this in the menu. And you can see all of the things that are plans. So all of these future methods I'm going to use now. So I'm going to take out the comments, and I'm going to get the pattern for this from the data access interface. So we already created a list of things that are CRUD application activities. So let's go find that. That's over here in the orders data access interface. And remember this? This is the promise of what all of the access can do at the data access layer. So I'm going to copy all of them and then go back to the business, and let's just replace this with my new guy. So the interface of both the business service and the data access layer are the same. So really the business service in this application is just kind of a pass-through service. It really doesn't do much other than pass one from the lower level to the upper level. So it's a pretty simple app. All right, so let's go back into the business service now, and we should see that we have a problem. It'll complain at the top here where I have the name of the class, and it says, you promised me that I would implement this interface over here, and I see that you've added some new methods. Would you like to implement those now? So let's go ahead and choose the link that says add on implemented methods, and we scroll down and we start to see them. I see an error as I scroll up a bit. Init and destroy are problems because the interface, I probably erased those from the interface. Let's go put them back. So that's pretty easy to fix. I just go back to the interface for this method, and I'm going to add the public void init and public void destroy, and so that way the interface matches all the items that were implemented in the class. So let's take out the comments and take out the null. Now I have this thing called the orders DAO, I believe, and that is been injected at the top of the class. It is a service to us. And now we should be able to find a search term, and we can search for the items and return it. So the business layer, like I said, is pretty simple. All it does is ask the data layer to do something and pass it on. Okay, before I pass on to the next activity, let's take a look at this error. It says you tried to implement a list. Actually, in Java, it has to be a perfectly defined as what kind of list, as an array list. So let's save that change. Okay, so now we have the data access layer doing searches. We have the business layer doing it. Anything happening at the controller level? Let's go check it out. So I'm going to the orders REST controller and see if there's anything around for our item on searching. And I don't see one. All I see is a method for showing all orders. So this is the missing piece that we have to add. I think we've got a pretty good start with this code, so I'm going to use this method for the next one. So the get mapping is for something we're going to look for, and a search term is what we're expecting in the URL. So we're modifying one method to serve the search term. So let's rename the method as search orders. And then for our return type, we are going to use the service, and we're going to look for a different method. Instead of getting all of the orders, we're going to do a search. And for the parameter inside of there, we do need a string, which is going to tell us what to search for. So I'm going to call it search term. Now, what's the problem? Is that we don't have any variable defined as search term. What I'm looking for is to grab this variable from the URL as this thing is going to be passing data in. But how do I get that to convert into a string down here? So what the missing piece is found inside the parentheses in the parameters of our method. So I need to put in something called a path variable. And the path variable is referring to that part in curly brackets called search term. We give it a definition. So it is a string, and I'll use the name of the variable called search term. Now we have one more piece. We have to say, in your URL, in your path variable, tell me what this thing represents. And it is the word search term. So we've got some search terms here that are actually different things. So if I wanted to make it clear, I could rename like this one to be X and this one to be X. That would work, and it would let you know that this is different. This search term up here is different than the variable search term over here. So I'm not going to leave it as X because that's just a bad variable name. It's not very descriptive. So I'm going to press Control Z to undo. And I just don't want to confuse you that this variable has anything to do with the name that was used in the URL. They're obviously related, but they don't have to be named exactly the same thing. So we've got all three layers now. We've got the controller configured to do a search. We have the business service and the data access service supposedly ready to go. Let's see if it works. Now in the URL, I'm going to add one more thing here. I'm going to put in the word search and then the word search term to follow it. I think that will probably make more sense than just putting in a search term. But let's go ahead and save this and refresh it, and let's see if the browser will actually display anything. So I'm back in the browser, and the last time we were here, we did a view for all of the orders, and that URL seems to work still. So now let's put in our new URL, which is search, and then something to follow. I'm going to put in the word moon, and sure enough, we get one result. Let's try another one. Let's put in the letter the. And now we get several, so it looks like almost all of them have THE as one of their words. Let's put in another one. Let's put in grand, and well, we got Grand Canyon. So I think the searching seems to be working. Way to go. Now, as I mentioned, there might be another way to do a search. This really has nothing to do with Spring or the controllers, but it is a Java lesson, so you may have not seen this. This is called streams. We're going to comment out the items that are above here in the for loop. And we're going to just redo the exact same functionality using a different kind of syntax. So this might be useful to you because a lot of programmers use this kind of thing, especially like in languages such as JavaScript or in Link with C#. So what we're going to create is a new list called found items. And then we're going to do an operation on the orders list. So we'll type in found items equals orders, and then we'll put a dot stream. So stream means go ahead and stream through or browse through a list and do some processing on each item in the list. So we're going to do a function called filter. As you can see, we're chaining together different events. So these dots means continue on from the previous. So dot filter is the next item. Inside of here, we need an anonymous function. This is or sometimes called an arrow function. So for each item in the list, we're going to treat the item as the variable called order. And if order has the product name as a lowercase to contain the search term, also to lowercase, then we're going to add it to the list. And we're going to collect it. And when we're done, we're going to have the entire collection converted to a list so we can return it to the main function. And so we'll return found items when we're all finished. So what do you think? Did you like this? You can use the previous example if you want, or you can keep the function as it's written here. So I hope it works. I'm just going to test it out by saving it and then going back into the browser and try to do another search. And sure enough, it looks to me like I haven't damaged anything. So I don't know if I gained anything with that or not, but that's another way to use searching when you're querying through lists of items. Now the next function we're going to work on is add1. So add1 returns a number, a long. And so in this case, we're just going to have to call the function called orders.add and pass in the new parameter called new order. So very simple operation. So there's really no concept where I could see how this could fail. When you do a string add, it's just going to work. However, in a database, if you were to create an add function, there might be something misnamed, a SQL statement that's wrong. And so there is a possibility of that failing if it were trying to insert into a table. So we're going to return a 1 for success and a 0 for failure. Now we pass that up to the business layer. So can you do that? Can you fix the business layer? So let's go look at the business layer. Let's go check it out. It's the orders business service. And do we have something for adding? Let's go down and we find add one. And sure enough, there's a method that is unfinished. So let's go ahead and put in the orders DAO as our item for our operations. And there should be an add one, and then we're done. So add one seems to work. Now we need to put it into the controller. Well, we've got the bottom layer, the middle layer. Now let's go fix the controller. Okay, let's go and check out the orders REST controller. We're going to add some items here. So make sure you get the REST controller. And then we're going to go to the bottom and add a new message. So we're going to post something. So let's do a post mapping now. So post is used for when you're trying to add something to a database, not just get from a database. So posting means kind of like insert. And so we're going to then have a method that's going to handle that. Let's take a value, a return value of a long type, and call the method add order. So now we're going to have to receive a order model from somewhere. Don't know where exactly yet, but we're going to get it as a parameter. So let's just put in order model and call it model. Then we're going to use the service as our helper, and service.add1 is available to us, and we'll send the model. Now, a post mapping has to get its data from somewhere, and that's the mystery that we don't have yet solved. Where does this parameter get its values? Where does order model come from? Well, you get two choices. If you are creating a data entry form on a web page, the form post method will take all of the properties such as text fields and checkboxes and everything else, and will bundle it up very nicely for you and send it to the controller as the object if all of the things match nicely. The other option is what we're doing with Postman is that you can send in data in a JSON text format. And so that's what we're going to use right now. We're going to use Postman to try to add something. Now, to make that actual transition from the Postman to this controller, we have to tell it where the data is coming from, and it is from the request body. So we'll show you what the request body looks like in just a jiffy after we get Postman working. So request body has to be here, so it's either from a form or from a Postman request, as you'll see in a minute. Okay, let's go to Postman and make this work. So let's take a look online to get this tool. So Postman, as you can see, is a tool that does processing of REST APIs. So go ahead and download what you need. As you can see, I'm using a Macintosh, so I'm going to choose the Apple chip and then get it installed. I think you have to register here with a valid email address to make this work, but once you're up and running, it's a free tool. So I have the app open right now and I'm logged into it. You can see I have a bunch of folders for previous projects that I was working on. So I'm going to the collections area and add a new one, and let's give this thing a name. Let's call this my orders app. Okay, so I've got orders app in here, and inside of this folder I'm going to add a new request. So go ahead and choose request. The first type we have is get request. Let's just test it out to see if we know what we're doing. So I'm going to type in the URL of the get all of the orders. So this was 8080 API/v1/orders with a trailing slash, and I send it away, and you can see at the bottom that I get the same results in this app that I did in my browser. So the get requests seem to work. So let's give this thing a name. So I'm going to right click and choose name this get request as get all orders. Let's try the next one that we created here. Let's create the search item. So let's add a new request, and let's try this as name is search orders. Let's see if we can make that one work. So I'm going to do the same kind of a URL, except at the end I'm going to add the word search and then a slash and then some term. So in this case I'm going to search for the word moon and go ahead and send it off, and I get orbit the moon with SpaceX for one of my items. So searching seems to work. That's good. So it's nice to have these results in front of me because I need to have an example model to copy. So I'm going to take this shoot for the moon thing and I'm going to copy it and use it in my next request. So my next request is going to be adding an item. Okay, so this one's a little more tricky. So for adding an order, we're going to switch the type of the request from get to post. Then I'm going to put in the URL for my orders URL. Just has a trailing slash, make sure you get that. And then in the body, I need to put some information. So let's switch to body, tell it that this is a raw data type, and it's expected to be in the JSON format. So once I have all of that set, then I can paste in some text, or type it if you like. I'm not very good at typing, so that's why I wanted to copy this orbit the moon thing. So let's create a slightly different version of this. So the ID number, instead of 2, let's call it something like 22. And just to be consistent here, we'll put in a 22 there. Orbit the moon with SpaceX, and we'll call it, we'll say twice. So that way it's a little bit different. And the price, we better raise that so it's more expensive to go around twice, isn't it? And there's not many available, so let's just set it to 1. Okay, so we've got ourselves the entire item in our request body set up with a unique identified item. So let's go with 22 and 22 and send, and we get a result back at the bottom that says a 1. So that means that it probably worked. So let's go ahead and search all orders and do a send, and sure enough, we get the item that says orbit around the moon twice. And so it did actually insert it into our list. So that is add 1 that seems to be working. So now let's continue on with the rest of the methods that are in our controller and in our services. So I'm starting at the bottom here with the orders fake DAO, and I'm looking at get by ID. Looks like this one's unfinished, so let's go ahead and code something that will return one item if it matches the ID number. So we need to go through a for loop or some kind of a loop to find a matching ID number. So let's go from for to I equals 0 all the way up to the length of the size of the orders list. Then we're going to inspect each item in the list and get its ID property. So we go to get I, which means get at position I, and then get the ID number at that position. We'll compare it to the ID, which was passed in as a parameter. If we find a match, we return it. When we return an item, this method will stop. So if we reach the end of the for loop, that means that nothing was found, nothing was ever returned. And so we can return a null value if it was unsuccessful in finding that item. Okay, so that's the lowest level. Now let's go to the business service level. So let's scroll down a bit until we come to the get by ID method. So this method is a pass-through method. All we have to do is call our orders DAO service and then call the method called get by ID, and we're passing it the parameter. So this will return either a null value or an actual order model. So let's go ahead and put it into the return statement. So it is a pass-through method, so we're just relying on the services of our DAO, or data access service, below. So now let's go into the controller, our REST controller, and we're going to add a new endpoint to the URL. So this will be a get mapping, and it will expect to see a number in the URL. So /ID is the URL. Now we're going to then create a method, and you can return an order model as its data type and give it a name like get by ID. So we're going to rely on the service called service, which is our business service, and we'll call the function that we just defined a second ago. And so it will get something by the ID number. Now, once more, we have to be able to fetch the ID number from the URL in the browser. So look up higher. Did we see this used in a previous example? Let's take a look up here at where we called this path variables. So in our search function, we looked for something that was called search term, and we defined it as a string. So we're going to use the same strategy here. So let's copy this. So I press Control C, and then I'm going to insert it before this long, and we're going to rename that as an ID. So this will interpret the number from the URL and pass it in as a path variable. It's good enough for me. Let's test it out. So I'm saving, and then let's rerun the app. Okay, I'm back to my web browser. So I've got the app running, and I think I can just refresh the page to confirm that search isn't working. Now, instead of having a search as my URL, this one is to get an item by its ID number. So let's put in a 2, and we get the same result, almost. Notice that this is a single item, and if I back up one page, this is a list. So it's a list here of one item. And let's go forward. and get back to the ID number 2 and see that it is a single item. So let's try number 3. What comes up with 3? Looks like shot from a cannon. And if we try something like 99, we probably get nothing. So we got an empty result. So advancing on, let's switch back into the code editor and go back to the orders DAO. I'm looking for another item that is unfinished. So we have delete 1, which is not written yet. So if you want to see, you've probably seen the pattern now for a few minutes. Let's pause the video, see if you can create a method that will delete 1 from the list and then return a true statement if it is a actual delete success. Then pass it through the business layer and then finally create a method in the controller. So if you want to try all that, stop the video and then come back and I'll code it with you. Okay, so I'm going to keep coding so you can see how I would do delete 1. So I'm going to copy some code. The delete 1 function is a lot like find 1. So we'll go to the very first method in our area and let's copy it. So this is a for loop. So the for loop goes and finds one matching item that has the same ID number as was passed in. So looking for an item with the ID number of ID. Now instead of trying to return that item, we need to change it slightly. We're going to remove it. So I'll do orders.remove and then it wants the index number. If the removal is working, if we found this item, then we can return true. If we get to the end of the for loop, then the same rules apply as the previous method. If we exit the for loop and we haven't returned anything, that means that ID number did not match anything in the list, and we can return then the value false. So now let's switch into the business service and go find the corresponding method here. So delete 1 is the method I'm looking for. Now to return the value here also is a Boolean, so it matches nicely with our service below. So let's put in orders.DAO dot delete 1 and send it the ID number. So this should remove 1 item. Now let's go up to the top and go to the level where the controller is and finish that. So let's go to the controller and let's start by copying and pasting. We're going to use the getById method because it's so similar again. Copying and pasting, and let's change the URL. So if we put in the word delete in the URL, then it's very clear what we're trying to accomplish. So we'll delete and have to supply an ID number. So the request path variable should be the same way as the getById. And then we just call the service to say return a delete 1 result, which will be a Boolean, true or false. So as a result of copying and pasting, we have 1 error, and you can see that the return type here doesn't quite match up with what I need. So if we return a Boolean and the function that I have here is not a Boolean return type, they don't match. So let's just set this to Boolean, and then hopefully the error goes away. And it seems to. So let's go ahead and save this and run it again to test delete. All right, so let's take a look at the browser and I'm going to change the URL. So right now I'm searching for Grand and I got the Grand Canyon. There is an item in my database with ID number 4. So let's try to delete that one since we know it's already there. So let's change the URL from orders search. Let's do orders and then put in a delete. And then put in another slash and we'll put in a 4 to see what happens. So it returns a true value. So that must mean that it deleted it. Let's back up 1 page and we're just going to refresh this search for Grand Canyon. And what happens? Got an empty result. So it looks like nothing was found there. So let's do a quick search on everything. So I'll do an orders and let's check to see if it's there. So we got 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it skips to 5. So it looks like the delete function worked. So now it's time to do the update 1 method. So we're returning into the orders DAO, and remember this is the bottom of the stack. So we're going to copy and paste again the for loop, and then we're going to modify it. So in this case, we are searching for any item in the list whose ID number matches ID to update. So we're just going to change 1 item here where we're doing the comparison. Once we have the item that's found, then we can set that item in the list. We're going to set it by the order called update order. Notice that update order was passed in as a parameter, and we're looking for anything that would be able to replace the item at ID to update. Once we get that, we can return an entire item. So we'll go ahead and return that item that's found at position I. Once more, if we exit the loop, that means nothing was found. That ID number doesn't exist in the list, and we'll return a null value. Let's make a quick trip into the business service and find the update function. So update 1 is found here, and we can once again just do a pass through. So we're going to return whatever the results are from the orders DAO service, and we'll call the update 1 method. The parameter names all seem to match up really well. So in the orders REST controller, the last method that we're doing here is the most tricky, which is update. So we could request data in two different ways. We're going to have a post update and expect something from the message body, and then we're also going to use an ID number in the URL. So to do this, let's take the add order item and start with that as our model. That uses a post mapping, so we're expecting data to be sent through a form, or in our case, we're going to use Postman to request it in the body of our message. So let's start with the URL as update/ID number. And then we're going to get the request body to include the model that we're going to be updating. And then we're going to use the path variable called ID to get the ID that we're supposed to change. So then when we're all done here, we can go ahead and call the service.update1, and it looks like ID and model are the exact same parameters that I need to send. Lastly, we need to change the return type because we're not expecting a number to come back from the service, but in this case, it's either going to be null or it's going to have an order model brought back to us. Okay, so we got an update item and the ID number that we're expecting to change. Let's see if this actually works in the browser or, in this case, in Postman. All right, we're back in Postman now, and so in this case, we're trying to do an update. So let's switch into the add order request here and see what that looks like. So as you can see, this was a post item, and if we go check the body out, we were expecting to order or send this order in. So this is the same kind of format that we're expecting to use for an update. So let's get an item that we can use as our updated item. So I'm going to go to the get all orders, and let's pick number 9 as our example to start with. So I'm going to copy all of the items from number 9. That's going to be our modified record that we're going to change. So let's go over to the orders folder and choose add a new request. So we're going to change this to a put request, and then we're going to put in the body our raw and JSON formatted data, and then go ahead and dump this in here. So far, this is not changing anything. We're just copying and pasting the value for record number 9. So I'm going to make one change here in the description or the product name. I'm going to say scuba dive in Jellyfish Lake, and let's raise the price from $4 to $4.90. We'll keep the ID number the same. So now the other item was the localhost orders, and then I was going to put in, I think it was update, and then we are expecting this to be order number 9. Now there's one change that I know is going to be wrong here. I have requested this to be a put. A put is for making modifications, and a post is for creating items. And so I know my controller isn't matching this at all. So put is what I'm trying to create, and the controller is expecting a post. So let's change the controller. So I'm going to swipe back to the controller, and for once in my life, I am anticipating an error. So this is a put mapping, and it looks like we have to go ahead and add a new import to make that occur. And let's see, I'm going to save this and hope for the best. Okay, it recompiled, no errors, so let's switch back into here. And when I send this, it should update record number 9. And it says record number 9 came back, and it says in. So the fact that the record came back and there was no null message means it's probably okay. I'm going to go ahead and search all the orders just to make sure. Let's do a send and go look for record number 9 to see what's there. So record number 9, it does say in Jellyfish Lake for $490. Wow, it worked on the first time. So I'm going to go back into my code just to make sure I'm done here. I think I've got all of the items. So let's go to the interface and check to see how many items we have here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 different methods. Let's go check our order, fake orders DAO, and count to make sure we got all these right. So here's 1, 2, 3, and let's see what else is here. 4, 5, and finally update is 6. So it looks like I've hit all of the items. Let's see what our controller has. So how many items in the controller? We'll start here. There's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, and let's see, 5 and 6 is up at the top. So we've got all of the items that make a complete CRUD operation for our app. So this is the REST service. Now, I think this is a complete item. We can now go and create a front end that is able to consume all this using JavaScript or something like React or Angular. So we'll do another video to create a single page application that is very simple, and we'll use this REST API. Also, a future video that we have not completed is that I have an orders controller that is good for time leaf pages, and it only has one method in it. It has show all orders. So there is a challenge for you. If you would like to complete the rest of the items, there should be 6 different operations for the CRUD, and we can only see one of them here. So delete buttons and edits and search forms and all those things, that's a whole lesson in itself. If you were in my class at Grand Canyon University, I might just assign that as homework. But if you want to stick around, you can see another video of that coming up soon. So this has been a long process. This is the biggest video that you'll get in the course by far. It handles the most of the actions of the controller. Now, ahead of us still is actions on the database. So this fake DAO is only manipulating a list that is hard-coded into the program. That's obviously not very realistic. Instead, a future video will cover how to create a SQL database, and we'll be able to arrange SQL statements and then do some more higher level programming to simplify that. And then we'll also get into a Mongo database. So lots of details on how you can implement storage and persistence with your application. So keep with me, and by the time you're done, you'll have a fully functional app, and you'll have learned a lot about Spring Boot. So congratulations on reaching this far, and let's continue.